So my name is Hai Nguyen. I'm the current co-chair of FEM-R, but I'm also a PhD researcher at the University of Turku. And yeah, FEM-R is the organization we're talking about. And we actually turned 5 this year. So how our organization started was on a Twitter chain back in 2018. And it was founded by 4 racialized feminists, Bayar Kutal, Brigida Krasniqi, Nitin Sood, and Pasilaiti Simayang. And this was cool because they didn't know each other beforehand. So they only met on Twitter. And that's how we got started. And our 2 main areas of focus are peer support and anti-racist expertise. And all of our activities are founded on a for us, by us principle. And we organize peer events and build networks consisting of racialized feminists. And we also work in policy as much as we can, internationally and nationally, of course, and on a local level as well. Okay, this is a really kind of complicated question, I think. It ties into a lot of things. And I think a good starting point for this is, for many people, is the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, the FRA, who published a report called Being Black in the EU. And according to this report, Finland is among the most racist countries in the EU for Black people. So I think that's very telling of the situation here in Finland. And that is also to say that Finland is very hostile to other racialized minorities as well. It's just that Black people are, I think, most visible and in a lot of ways most vulnerable minorities in Europe. Of course, there's Roma people as well. But as like this kind of migrant background peoples, they are very vulnerable and very visible. And yeah, so in the public discussion, I think mainly 2 points have been raised about racism and structural racism in the job markets and in the housing. So in relating to the job markets or the labor markets, there was a Finnish study on how just a non-Finnish name in a job application affected your chances of getting a callback for a job interview very negatively, very poorly. And there have been other incidents and campaigns where people with non-Finnish names have applied with a Finnish name and received a callback, even with the exact same resume and application. And then I think there was a campaign called Work Name or something like this, where they kind of these famous kind of entrepreneurs and so forth applied for jobs with their actual resumes, but with like stereotypical Romani names, and none of them received a callback to the job interview. So that's one way structural racism manifests in Finland. And this is, I think, the less subtle ways that we can see it manifesting itself. In housing, then there's, of course, residential segregation, which we can also see. Of course, it has to do a lot with economics, but that also feeds into issues that working class racialized people have, and they are the most kind of precarious people, arguably, here in Finland. And of course, there's gentrification in terms of housing issues, which kind of pushes not only working class white people, but also racialized people away from these areas, which are kind of instrumental in having jobs, because that's where these places of work exist in near the city centers and in the kind of big economic hubs of Finland. And then I think another issue that's been talked about recently is this kind of racial linguistic issue. So in terms of like language, there's this issue with students who are put into in school. They're put into kind of Finnish as a second language class in school, and this might lead to education inequality with poor language skills and poor learning outcomes. And these affect children who may have even kind of native-like ability in Finnish language, but they're still kind of perceived as having kind of inadequate language skills for the Finnish system. So they're put systematically or systemically in Finnish as a second language classes. So that feeds into that as well. And in addition to these, there's also racial and ethnic profiling by police and security professionals. And we all know how that works in kind of every country. Definitely there's a denial of this sort of conversation. There's been a lot of talk about like how our language, Finnish, doesn't really have the capability or the capacity to even discuss these issues. So we kind of lack the lexicon for these issues, like accepted, widely understood terms and concepts for the discussion, but also just this what's kind of termed color evasiveness. So this kind of unwillingness to discuss race. Instead, we use in Finland these kinds of kind of euphemisms for race. So instead of race, we talk about ethnicity or immigration or immigrants, or with like Muslim context, we talk about Muslims first and foremost, even though there might be something else at play than their kind of brownness or their religion or whatever. So there is this unwillingness to discuss these issues. And we can also see that in the kind of nationalist narrative of Finland. And I think, well, I'm not sure about the other Nordics, but because we do see some improvements, for example, in Sweden, our neighboring country, where kind of they don't have this kind of discourse of first generation and second generation immigrants, but instead kind of the second generation already is very Swedish, and they're kind of taken into society with all the good and with all the bad that they kind of possess, similarly to kind of any Swedish person, which is good. But then in Finland, there's this kind of national or nationalist narrative of Finnishness, which kind of attempts to assimilate and to erase the different lived experiences of different intersections. So, for example, this narrative has kind of reduced all of the historically kind of all the Finnish peoples and kind of mold them into this one nation in a sense, that we've kind of lost these regional identities of like the Western Finns and then the Eastern and then the Southern Finns. So there's like we used to have these kinds of I don't know what the correct English word or translation would be, but kind of like tribes, which had linguistic and ethnic differences and a huge diversity. And in top of that, we also had, of course, Finnish Romani people, and then the Sami peoples, and then other ethnic minorities historically living in Finland for more than I think 100 or 200 years. So this kind of narrative of just one nation under one state is a very reductive view in terms of when we think about immigration. So the kind of, I think the kind of naive interpretation would be that when we kind of assimilate immigrants to Finland, we aim to make them Finnish, but that's also to kind of reduce their ethnicity into a Finnish ethnicity, and kind of evade the whole idea that they could be discriminated against based on some kinds of features that they have, or some issues that they have. For example, based on, well, race, like we're talking about today, and religion, and skin color, and whatever. So it does reduce and kind of hide a lot of the discrimination, and kind of hides the or makes the discussion really difficult, because then we're not talking about the same concepts or same terms. And it goes even further when we see the politicians now kind of trying to kind of obfuscate the terms, or make it even more difficult to conversation itself. So they're trying to kind of redefine racism. Recently, there were a couple of right-wing politicians here in Finland who are trying to talk about classical racism, which is a very interesting concept. But that also goes to show that they're not willing to use the scientific, the sociological, the kind of current understanding of racism. Instead, they're kind of going back to whatever their notion of racism is, but they've never kind of really narrowed it or defined it better than the people in social sciences have done. It is, well, I don't really know to what extent, but racism is very normalized in Finnish society, and in Finnish politics. So much so that that I think these reactions to kind of, or the attempts to kind of redefine racism is very telling of that, because when they see something that's very normal, what they've considered normal, what they've considered okay, that someone is kind of critiquing it and calling it out as racism, even though it's been considered okay for the past 10 to 20 years. They don't really understand or see it as, or they do see it as a what's the word, like it's like I don't know why I'm struggling today, but basically it's just that acts as a justification, because something has been done before, something can be done now as well. So that doesn't really work, because we can see that, of course, from the lens of what we know now, we can look at past actions. We know that this is not okay. We don't need to do this anymore. We can kind of critique it and then do better and then move on, right? But that's not how I think it is with racism in Finland, because of these. We can see the reactions coming from this, kind of trying to redefine it, even though we've just kind of highly tuned our tools, or just gotten better tools or better understanding of racism and how it works in Finland. So so I think the issue here is actually that we've made it visible where it was previously invisible, and very kind of normal and okay. And I think this past summer has just reiterated the stance that racism is very normalized and very institutionalized. But I have to say that I do see a better understanding of racism slowly forming. So these kinds of discussions, these kind of scandals, and to be honest, these scandals are nothing new. They've been going on for the past 10 to 15 years in Finland. But there is this better understanding of racism slowly forming, and it's a really good thing. So this kind of critical stance on racism, making it visible, is very good. But still, it's framed around immigration, which is one issue, one way of looking at it. But it's just that when we frame racism around issues of immigration, we're kind of excluding a lot of people outside of racism. And we're basically also saying that because you're not an immigrant, you don't kind of face racism in a way. Even though that could be further from the truth, because when we think of children of immigrants, or people who have been adopted here or whatever, it doesn't really matter where you come from or how you came here. It's still racism, and it doesn't have to be connected to immigration in anyway. So I think our feminism, or I don't think it is, it is our organization's understanding of feminism is that it's inherently intersectional. It's very important because it acknowledges the different lived experiences at different intersections, such as gender, race, and religion. And but in Finland and in the Nordics even, there is a misunderstanding of intersectionalism, I think, as it's often mistaken as a kind of oppression of Olympics, so that we're kind of talking about who kind of is oppressed the most, or who suffers under this kind of regime the most, wherever. So it's not a competition, but it is an acknowledgement of how the mechanics of oppressions work, to kind of oppress, I don't know, well, how they work with different intersections and different peoples. But at the same time, for us, intersectional feminism is a celebration in a way of different intersections. So we acknowledge that there are differences between, for example, Muslim men, Muslim women. There's differences between working class Asian women and middle class European men. And these kind of, to us, these are given. We understand that these are completely different positions, and the way society views us is wholly different, and how society treats us is also very different. And so we see that the mechanics for racism work differently with different people. But like I said, we also celebrate our intersections, because while they do affect how negatively we are viewed in society, it also gives rise to our diversity, right? And also within these intersections, we find places for solidarity and community. So we can kind of, so for example, if we think of Muslims, we can kind of forego, I think, like where you're from, like if you're an Asian Muslim, or like Southeast Asian Muslim, or South Asian Muslim, or like West Asian, or kind of Middle Eastern or North African Muslim, you have that in common, right? Or if you want to kind of forefront some other intersection, we can find community in that, and then find solidarity in that as well. So I think this is why intersectional feminism is very important in our work. And I think the main issue in mainstream feminism, what makes our work so very important, is that mainstream feminism is concerned with mainly middle class cisgendered white women and their empowerment, while it ignores, or even at worst, sacrifices racialized women's rights. And I think especially those from working class backgrounds. So they kind of prioritize different issues, and it doesn't really leave space for solidarity or community in that way, because they kind of forefront, or kind of are even they don't even want to see maybe the struggles of like other kinds of women, just like a certain type of women. and we think that mainstream feminism overlooks the care economy, which is female dominated, and especially here in Finland, where kind of teachers systemically steer racialized girls from academic paths toward nursing studies, and where right-wing politicians are looking to racialized migrant women as a solution for the labor shortage in our healthcare system. So we can see these kinds of issues popping up, but really mainstream feminism isn't concerned about these kinds of issues. And like kind of, I think, other ideologies or mainstream ideologies here in Finland, mainstream feminism also resorts to this kind of color evasiveness, so that it attempts to mitigate and hide the effects of race, instead framing issues mainly as women's rights issues, and it completely disregards like the specific needs or specific solutions that other people might need. We also think that mainstream feminism also ignores the agency of racialized women, racialized people. Instead of amplifying racialized people's views or giving space to them, they use these issues to kind of prop their own status as feminists. So I think that's why we champion intersectional feminism. One issue in Finland that we're kind of seeing right now is harassment and targeting of kind of activists, especially targeting kind of these racialized or activists who already belong in kind of marginalized communities or marginalized peoples, so that it's kind of it's really difficult to do anything without the fear of harassment and targeting. And at its worst, it kind of stops us from doing anything kind of worthwhile. I mean, we can always do stuff at the grassroots level, relatively anonymously. But of course, we need to have these big organizations that affect change at a governmental level as well. So that's one issue that we're seeing, and the Finnish government is unwilling to kind of amend the legislation to kind of recognize hate speech, for example, or harassment or targeting. So that's one great issue that we have. Other challenges, I think, that we've kind of faced is not having a seat at the table, so to speak. So FEM-R turned 5 this year, and during this time, we've been invited to some tables, and other tables we've been left out. So this is an issue working with any governmental bodies, kind of trying to find the channels, the proper channels to kind of affect change. And when we're talking about governmental bodies, there are a lot of them. There are many ways to do it, but just we just need those allies to kind of direct us and kind of keep the doors open for us. But then we're also interested in just carving out our own table, and kind of making those seats for us and our kind of allies and our cooperative kind of partners and stuff like this. So, well, personally, during my time in FEM-R, we've had actually multiple social media campaigns, which have garnered a lot of attention, gotten a lot of views, and what's it called? Well, anyway, they've been pretty big. So I think last year it was this campaign called "My Name is Pronounced Like This," which was cool because it forefronted like non-Finnish names and kind of taking pride in how we are and how we present ourselves. And it was really important for a lot of people, but for me as well, as a Vietnamese Finnish person whose name gets kind of butchered a lot. It just gave us kind of a right to be ourselves and to present ourselves the way we want to ourselves to be presented. But yeah, these social media campaigns have been big. But I think the biggest things that or the biggest achievements we've had is just the growth of the organization from a 4-person initiative to we are more. I think we're more than 720 members at the moment. So in 5 years, I don't know what these kinds of numbers are usually, but for us, this feels like a huge deal, especially here in Finland. And we've gotten more established as an organization. Like I said, we've been invited to some tables, but not others. So we're still working on that. But one single thing that I can't really take credit for, but I can thank I can give a shout out to our active members in this is we have this anti-racist lexicon, which has been widely used in Finland. It's gotten much praise and thanks. We're still developing it because, like I said, Finnish doesn't really have the vocabulary to kind of discuss these issues. So we figured, why shouldn't we just do this then? Why we'll create the words and kind of develop these concepts and terms for you to use so that there's no excuse of not having the language for it. Well, one thing which is kind of easy is funding is always important. So donations, even small ones, are always appreciated. But more than that, taking time to volunteer and help out is also very crucial, and I think that's very undervalued. And not all activities are meant for everyone. Like I said, FEM-R is founded upon this principle of for us by us. But there are always ways to help out. Just ask how you can help, or kind of think of how you can help. For example, sharing and forwarding messages, organizing support actions, or writing to politicians to call them out on their policies or actions. And then there's the personal things, the small things one can do. If we're talking about average non-activist people, are things like rethinking and revisiting your own position in society and your own privileges. I think the most important thing that we can all kind of think about, and for all activism and non-activism, is to treat people with kindness and compassion. And we don't have enough of that right now, and it costs us nothing. So that's an easy thing to do, I think.